Shalom, Erev Tov. Good evening from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited. Welcome to episode 22 of our weekly Root and Branch Association Medical War Crimes Seminar, hosted by Rabbi Hanania Weissman. In my opinion, the Rabbi Dov Ber Weiss-Mandel of our times. Now, without further ado, let me hand the mic over to our host. Rabbi Weissman, it's all you.
Thank you very much, Lowell. Our guest tonight, semi-facetiously, is the Chafetz Chaim. Of course, he is in the other world, but we do have his words with us today. And the reason why I wanted to have the Chafetz Chaim and his words on the show is in light of the Walder news going around that everybody's been talking about for the last couple of weeks. If you've been following my writing, I've been writing about that as well, because it's extremely relevant, not just in and of itself, but also in terms of the larger picture, both spiritually and in terms of what the government is really trying to do. And it's really important, and I've emphasized this in the past, it's really important anytime somebody wants to give us information about anything, we have to really run it through two tests. One is, how does it stand up according to the Torah? What does the Torah tell us about this? Should we accept this? Should we not accept this? Should we do what these people want us to do or think what they want us to think or not? It has to pass the Torah test. And then after that, it has to actually make sense. If it doesn't pass those tests, then we do not accept the information and we don't take the actions or think the thoughts that the people want us to believe. But it's very easy for us, if we're not in the habit of doing that, to skip that process and then just automatically trust the story or do what people are asking us to do. And therefore, I want to start by reminding people that the media is not your friend. The media is not looking out for your best interests. Even in better times, the media is a business. It is a for-profit business looking to make money. That is their primary concern. The truth is not their concern. Giving you the information that you need is not their main concern. Their main concern, even in better times, is making money. And these times where the media is really, they've gone over to the dark side and they're having their strings pulled by the government and the powers that be, they're certainly not your friend. And we have to be especially skeptical anytime we read anything in the media. Certainly today, when we also have anonymous websites, I'm not going to name the Jewish websites by name, but everybody knows what they are. Anonymous Jewish news sites, social media sites are cesspools of lashon hara, slander, false information. The comment sections are almost entirely anonymous. I'm not here to poskin for anyone, but in general, even if you have a good reason to be on these anonymous news sites or media sites in general, or social media, which I prefer to think of as anti-social media, even if you have a valid reason to be there, generally speaking, less is more. Try to minimize your time on these sites and know going in that you're going to a very dark and bad place. Don't let it influence you. Even when we're talking about so-called mainstream news sites and even Jewish news sites, when you see articles that are written by staff like Arutz Sheva staff or Times of Israel staff or Jerusalem Post staff, that sort of thing, you have to realize writers, when they get published, they want to have their name attached to their writing. They want to receive credit for what they published. They want to add it to their resume. So when you see something written by staff, don't think it's just a bunch of staff members sitting in the room all writing an article together. They're not doing that. They're republishing what somebody else sent them, usually from the government. The government or the health ministry is sending them something and saying, here, publish this. So they're publishing it as Arutz Sheva staff, which means that they didn't write it. They didn't vet it. They have no idea what they're being told. They said Rav Kanievsky said something, or the health ministry is telling you to publish something. So they're writing it as Arutz Sheva staff. So we have to understand these days that much of what we're reading on the media is really fiction. And when they're saying things about other people, the same rules apply. I had a hit piece written about me in the Jerusalem Post many years ago about my Shidduch Chronicles film series. I was not, a well-known person at the time. It wasn't a big deal, but the person who wrote the article didn't like me and, tried to make me look as bad as possible. Now, we'll talk about that maybe a different time, but people have to realize when you're reading something, even about people in the media, they're not vetting the information. They might have an axe to grind. Take it with a grain of salt. Now, we all know lashon hara is one of the greatest sins. We have the three big sins for which a Jew must always martyr himself: avodah zarah, gili arayos, and shfichus damim. Moral crimes, sexual crimes, murdering a person. If they tell you murder him or I will murder you, you have to martyr yourself for that. And of course, idol worship. And the next one on the list is lashon hara. We're taught as well better for a person to be thrown into a furnace of fire, as we learned from Tamar, than to speak badly about another person. It's a very, very serious avera. And the Sefer Chafetz Chaim begins with a lengthy list of sins that a person will often violate when they speak badly about other people. Aside from the actual avera of slandering a person, he lists 7 additional negative commandments and 14 positive commandments that a person is likely to violate, not necessarily all of them all the time, but they're likely to get in trouble with as many as 21 averos when they say lashon hara. And he also writes it's one of the main reasons for our continued exile. So if we want to get out of the mess that we're in, it would be a good idea to be extremely careful about this. And therefore, in light of the Walder scandal, I want to go to the original source. And it's something I've heard some of the lectures that rabbis have given, both rabbis that I respect and rabbis that I think are Erev Rav. I've heard what they have to say, and nobody brings up the Chafetz Chaim. I mean, the Chafetz Chaim is your go-to source when you want to learn about the laws of lashon hara. The Sefer Chafetz Chaim and Shmiras HaLashon is your go-to source. It's all here in this one volume. Very clear language, and everybody knows that this is where we go to learn about this, but nobody's talking about it. So that's why we're going to talk about it tonight. I'm also assuming that we all know this. I'm not going to go into great detail about the various averos. I'm just going to get right down to business about how this applies to the recent news. But in a general, when we're about to think something, or especially to post something on the internet, think before you say it or post it. Ask a shaila. Open up the Chafetz Chaim, study it for yourself, and when in doubt, err on the side of caution and don't say it, because generally speaking, we have very little to gain by peddling gossip about other people, and we have a great deal to lose. Therefore, we should be extremely, extremely careful before posting anything about a person or feeding the rumor mill. Even if everybody already knows about it, even if it's public knowledge, there's very little to gain and there's a great deal to lose. So err on the side of caution and learn the halachos first, which people don't do. Okay. So let's start with rule 6. Okay, in Sefer Chafetz Chaim, he has klalim, he has different rules, and he says in rule 6 various halachos that are very relevant to what's going on. The first 5 rules are basically talking about the very serious avera that it is to gossip about other people. He goes into that in great detail, but again, since I think everybody already knows this, it's important for us to be reminded of that. But I'm not going to go into that in great detail now, although I encourage everybody to study it again. In rule 6, he says, if you hear lashon hara about a person, you are allowed to suspect that it's true, but you're not allowed to take action based on the rumors that you hear, even if it's very serious, like a murder charge or a sexual abuse charge. Very serious charges. You are certainly allowed to suspect that it's true and take action to protect yourself. And as we'll see, sometimes to take actions to protect other people, but you're not allowed to believe with certainty that it's true. Okay, even if you read it in a newspaper or on a website, and even if everybody's saying it, you're not allowed to make up your mind this is definitely true. The most you're allowed to do is say it might be true. In the Sefer Shmiras HaLashon, in the very beginning, the Chafetz Chaim writes, he says, what good are all the warnings about how terrible it is to speak badly about other people, all the averos that you're doing, if people are simply going to say, well, this isn't lashon hara, or about this person, it's okay to say bad things. He's such a terrible person. He did such terrible things that the general rules, the normal rules don't apply to this person. So the Chafetz Chaim says, what good are all the warnings if people don't know the actual laws of what constitutes for forbidden speech? People have to know these things. We have to learn the halachos. He also adds that the laws of lashon hara apply to a beis din as well. And one of the examples he gives is if a single witness goes to a court, and we all know that you need 2 witnesses, al pi shnayim edim, right? Yakum davar. A matter stands with a minimum of 2 witnesses. So if let's say you witness somebody shoplifting, okay, but you're only one witness, and you go to the beis din and say, I saw so-and-so shoplifting, beis din will give you malchus. Beis din will punish you, even though what you're saying is true. And even though you have good intentions, they will punish you because what you're saying constitutes lashon hara. There is no productive purpose in you telling this to the beis din. They can't act on the information that you're giving them. You're not giving them valid testimony because you're only a single witness. Therefore, you're just slandering a person, even though he's wrong. The person's a criminal. He did something bad. You have positive intentions. Since there's nothing productive that can come from what you're saying, you're guilty of slandering the person, and the beis din will punish you. That's an actual halacha. So we'll see later on in more detail about this, but we have to understand the laws of Lashon Hara also apply to courts and testimony. Okay, back to rule number 6 in the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. Okay, in the case of Walder, everybody made up their mind. In fact, Shmuel Eliyahu, when he came out with his statements, he said Walder is guilty beyond any doubt. That's the quote that he said. According to the laws of Lashon Hara, he's not allowed to make up his mind with certainty that he's guilty. In fact, they even made up their minds before they started the trial, because they were asking people to come forth with prosecutorial testimony. A court is not allowed to do that. They're allowed to say if anybody knows anything about Walder, either positive or negative, anything relevant to testify about, then come and testify about it. Neutrally ask for testimony, but not say if anybody has negative information to come and testify. That means that they were already slanted. They already essentially made up their mind that he was guilty, and now they just wanted some dirt. They wanted some stronger evidence that he was guilty. They are violating Rule 6 in the Chafetz Chaim that you're not allowed to make up your mind based on hearsay or rumors. Okay? Now, people believe it's virtuous in today's cancel culture, in this mob mentality that we have today. People believe it's virtuous to always believe the accusations, to stand with the victims, even though they don't know for sure that they're victims. Okay, it's always virtuous to accept rumors and hearsay, but this is contrary to the halacha. So if people want to admit that they don't care about the halacha, that child abuse is so bad and sexual crimes are so bad that the halacha doesn't matter anymore, and we have to be so stringent about going after criminals that the halacha doesn't actually matter anymore. We're just going to go after all people all the time, regardless of the halacha. That's fine. Then they can say, we're so virtuous, we don't care about halacha, but then they can no longer say that they are observant Jews, because observant Jews always follow the halacha. They don't have virtues that transcend halacha. Halacha is the virtue. If you're not following halacha, according to the Torah, you're not actually virtuous. Now, in Rule 6, he also has a bunch of footnotes where he goes into the halachos in more depth. In footnote 30, that's the famous one where he has the tshuva of the Harik, who was a gadol. He was a rav in Italy in the 15th century, and he relates a story in which a married woman accused a man. It seems that he was actually a rabbi, of sinning with her, and she spread terrible rumors about him. And the people accepted this as being true, without going through due process, without verifying everything. They just accepted the accusations against this person. They basically stopped allowing him to come to shul, or they wouldn't call him up to the Torah anymore. They took very, very strong action against this person, and they essentially ruined his life. In the tshuva of the Maharik, he was very strongly critical of the people for taking these actions, and he goes into this in great detail. He says, first of all, Beis Din can give malchus or lashes to somebody when there are bad rumors going around a person. There is a halacha in certain cases that Beis Din can punish a person and even whip a person when there are bad rumors going around, but that's only when everybody knows that it's true, that it's factual knowledge that everybody knows. Meaning, for example, let's say we see somebody publicly violating Shabbos. It's out there in the open. Everybody sees it. So it's not just hearsay. Everybody knows that it's going on. So then, even if we don't have actual kosher testimony, but everybody knows that it's true, so Beis Din can then step in and take action against the person. Okay, but when it's only rumors, when it's not that everybody knows, it's just everybody's hearing the same thing, and they're all essentially hearing it from maybe one or two sources, but they don't really know. They're just trusting hearsay. Beis Din is not allowed to take these actions. People are not allowed to take these actions. Beis Din has to verify that there's really substance to the rumors, and everybody has to know that it's true, and only then can Beis Din take action, even if technically they don't have kosher testimony. And he writes, otherwise, if we don't have this measure built in, everybody will be struck again and again and again, because wicked people will go around spreading rumors. Everybody will know if you want to get somebody, just spread rumors about them. The mob will come after them. The Beis Din will strike them because there's rumors going around. And he says no person will be able to live. They'll just be going after everybody. Wicked people are going to destroy the society, as we see today in our own times with this cancel culture, which unfortunately is filtered into the Jewish world as well. As soon as there's a rumor somewhere, everybody wants to jump out in front of beating this person to death. That's not the way it works. Okay, it's the same thing with the Walder. It all hinges on essentially one person, Shmuel Eliyahu, who was the ringleader of the Beis Din. He was the leader of this witch hunt against him, and then everybody believes him. And therefore, on the basis of that, they're saying everything he said is true. He says he checked it out. He says he spoke to the people. We're trusting him. And on the basis of that, it must be true. And therefore, since it's true, anything goes. This is contrary to halacha. So you'll say, but there were 22 people who testified. Well, how do you know? How do you know that there were 22? Maybe there were 2, maybe there were 4, maybe there were 50. How do you know? Because the same people say so. We don't have names of any of these people. We're not privy to the testimony, as normally happens in a Beis Din. We're normally privy to the testimony. Not one of these people ever went to the police or spoke out publicly, but all of a sudden, this one rabbi or this small group of rabbis made them all feel safe until for all these years, they didn't feel safe talking about it to anybody anywhere. But now he made them all feel safe with his casting call for testimonies. And then they gave a name of a person, one of these alleged victims who allegedly committed suicide after the fact. She was conveniently dead and left no actual testimony, but we're told that she killed herself, committed suicide because she couldn't stand the pain of not everyone gobbling up the media reports. Right. So she was able to handle actually being the victim of abuse, having that bottled up inside her for all these years. She was able to handle everything. But now, after her accuser is dead, and after he essentially is being tarred and feathered after his death by almost everybody, but since not everybody believed the story, that was too much for her to bear, and that's why she killed herself. We're really supposed to believe this. I'm very skeptical of the story, and the message really is that anyone who doesn't gobble up the media reports and accept the hearsay as definitely true, contrary to the halacha that we're not allowed to accept it as definitely true, is somehow responsible for this poor woman's death. So you better believe the media reports. That's the real message that they're giving you. If you don't believe the lashon hara and you don't believe the hearsay, then you are responsible for these people's death and you're essentially a murderer. Now, how sinister and how sick are people to do something like this? To say that if you don't accept without question the media reports, then you are responsible for some person having so much pain that they can't go on living. We have a Torah that tells us what to believe, how much to believe, and under what circumstances. We are not to be pressured, shamed, or guilted into abandoning the Torah because people are on some moral crusade. And the people who play the, oh, you don't care about the victims card are disgusting people because everybody cares about victims. I don't know a single person who, if they knew that somebody is a victim of abuse, wouldn't care about them and do everything in their power to help that person. I think almost everybody would. So the thing is, not only do we care about the victims of abuse, but we also care about the victims of false accusations. And we also care about what the Torah actually teaches us. So we have the proper balance. So everybody could be protected. So people should stop playing this, oh, you don't care about the victims card if you don't accept the lashon hara as absolutely true. That's ridiculous. It's contrary to the Torah. The people who make these emotionally manipulative arguments are not balanced people. They themselves don't care about the Torah, and they're not at all compassionate. They like to portray themselves as they have so much compassion for the victims, but they're vicious people. They're actually trying to ruin people's lives, and they have no mercy on anybody. They will turn on anybody and ruin people's lives just like that with a snap of a finger, and they'll think that that makes them virtuous. Without vetting information, without getting the facts, they think that if they act without compassion, they're being compassionate. They twist everything around. So not only are we not obligated to believe that these stories are true according to halacha, we are not allowed to believe that they're true. And besides, it's not rational to believe that they're true because the story doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it isn't true or elements of it are true. I have no idea what Walder did. I have no clue, and you don't know either. And none of us really know. But the thing is, we can't just take it on someone's word. Rabbis have to follow halacha also. A Beis Din has to follow halacha also. And in fact, they have to set an example for how they follow it. The rabbi who says, you must believe me because I looked into it and I'm a great guy and I verified it's true and I'm telling you it's true, is desecrating the Torah. Okay? A rabbi has to encourage us to follow the laws in the Chafetz Chaim. He has to keep those laws himself and he has to set an example because the consequences of getting it wrong are just too great. Back to the tshuva of the Maharik. He continues and writes that when it says a Beis Din can strike a person beyond the letter of the law, as in the case of rumors, it means dafka the gadol hadar, meaning like the greatest rabbi of the time or the greatest Beis Din of the time, they have that privilege. It's not just any ad hoc Beis Din of 3 rabbis who get together and say, we're going after somebody. And he quotes the Rif, one of the main poskim in Judaism. And he writes that there are others who are more lenient in that regard, and they allow for an ordinary Beis Din as well. But again, in the case of Walder, who chose these rabbis to be the Beis Din in this matter? Who gave them jurisdiction over this? What process was followed in choosing these rabbis as opposed to other rabbis? And can any three people theoretically band together to try these rabbis for breaking the laws of the Torah and the Chafetz Chaim, or anyone else if they so choose? I'm a rabbi. Can I get two other rabbis together and engage in a witch hunt against somebody? Because, well, any basin can come together and just go after somebody. It doesn't work like that. Again, the Bezdin has to follow Jewish law as well. They can't have an ulterior motive or some kind of an agenda. Rabbis who take salaries from the government, conduct secret trials, and have a dubious track record would hardly be acceptable according to the Chafetz Chaim. There have to be actual witnesses and actual evidence. The testimonies and the evidence have to be held to real scrutiny and can't be kept secret. We can't have secret trials and then condemn someone to death. It's just the opposite. In fact, according to Jewish law, even in cases of murder, and especially in cases of murder, the testimony has to be public. We have to know who the witnesses are and exactly what they're testifying. Even if it's very painful and difficult for them to give the testimony, this is the way it has to be done for a very simple reason. Because according to the Torah, if it's not possible for that testimony to be proven false by the general public, by anybody out there who might know that this person is lying, that they claim that they were in this place at a certain time and they were really not there, they were in a different place, so therefore their whole testimony is false. If there is not a possibility of other people in the general public challenging the witnesses and saying, what you're saying can't possibly be true because you were with me on that day in a different place, that testimony is automatically invalid. So therefore, testimony must be public. We have to know who these people are. We have to know the where and the when and the details of the testimony, because that's what the Jewish law is. And that's the case even in cases of abuse, even in cases of murder, even in cases when it's very difficult and painful for them to speak about it. That's just the way the Jewish law works, because a society can't function any other way. We can't have closed door trials where people are being slandered and essentially put to death when we don't even know the details. It's not fair to anybody. Okay. And he continues. He says, furthermore, even if a basin takes it upon themselves to do this, to go after a sinner, they can't single out one person. Like in the case of Walder, they're finding an alleged abuser. They're singling him out and then look away from all the others who are doing the same thing. If they see a breach in the Jewish people, that there's a sin that really needs to be tackled, so they can't just go after one person and look the other way when other people are doing the same thing. Okay, that's not building a fence around the Torah, he writes, but a chilul Hashem, because people will say that they're targeting people. What's going on? What are people saying? They're targeting Walder. They had something against him, or he was hiding something, or what people have all their theories. And it's very likely true, because there are many abusers out there. And why are they suddenly waking up today and going after this one person? Many people in the government, all of the elites, the rich and powerful people, a lot of them are abusers. Where are the rabbis going after them? They're looking the other way. So why are they targeting only one person? If they're targeting one person, then they're not allowed to target anybody. They either have to go after basically everybody who's doing this, or they can't get involved. Okay. Now, I have my own theories for why they went after Walder, and I've written about it, but I'm not going to bring it up tonight because that's just my personal opinion. It's not Torah. The Torah of the Chafetz Chaim, everybody has to accept. My personal opinions and my theories, people don't have to accept. So I don't want to say something that other people might mock or think is crazy or otherwise think is wrong, and they will reject that, which they certainly may do. There's nothing wrong with that, but I don't want them on the basis of that to throw out everything else I'm talking about, which is pure Torah from the Chafetz Chaim. So I'll leave my theories to my writings, and we can talk about that another time. But either way, there's clearly a lot more going on with the Walder story than what we're being told in the media. This is not a pure righteous effort to stamp out abuse with no ulterior motive. There's a lot more going on over here. Back to the Chafetz Chaim in letter 9. We're in basically chapter 6 or rule 6. In letter 9, he writes, if a person is known to the public, as we mentioned earlier, to be a sinner, like he's violating Shabbos in public, then it is allowed to speak slanderously about him. But other conditions still apply. He actually lists 7 conditions, all of which must be met in order for it to be allowable to say slander about a person. We'll get to those a little bit later, but just keep that in mind, that even if a criminal is known to the public, that's the only time that you're allowed to publicly slander him, and you still have to meet 7 conditions. Okay, so people are now saying that Walder was well known, he's been doing this for 15 years or even longer. That's ridiculous. I don't buy that, because I never heard this before. It was never reported anywhere before. It wasn't common knowledge. I never heard anybody say such a thing, and very likely none of you did. So if it was well known, it should have been actually well known. And if it was in fact well known, why didn't the rabbis say anything until today? So they're saying after the fact, well, we knew, but we couldn't do anything because he was such an influential, powerful person. That just doesn't make any sense. So they were basically looking the other way while somebody was abusing people and then essentially murdering people, ruining their lives. And they looked the other way. But now they decided that an article came out in the newspaper, so they have to speak about it. That story doesn't hold any water. So so either way, these rabbis are doing the wrong thing. Either they were looking the other way for 15 years and letting him carry on with these terrible crimes, which is really, really bad. They were essentially helping him by looking the other way, or they're lying. So either way, they're stuck. Okay, we get to letter 14 in the Chafetz Chaim. He says that this heter, which we'll talk about the details of it, but in the limited cases where you are allowed to slander a criminal, it's extremely, extremely limited. And one has to be very careful before exercising this heter. You can't just react and shoot from the hips. Now, getting back to the reactions of the people, the social media commenters, the bloggers, the people talking about it, gossiping about it, this heter is very limited. You can't just see the story and then just start gossiping about it and say, oh, he's a horrible guy, he's a murderer, let's go get him. You can't just shoot from the hip. You have to know your facts. People are spreading lashon hara with no compunctions, no conscience, not the slightest concern that maybe, just maybe, they're going too far, the consequences of which are devastating. And now's the time to emphasize what the Chafetz Chaim says very early on. Lashon hara is wrong and a terrible sin, even if it's true. It doesn't matter. Even if Walder is guilty of all the things that they accuse him of and even more, and it's true, you're not necessarily allowed to spread all of this. Again, criminals have to be prosecuted. If somebody's actually endangering people, then they have to be stopped. But that doesn't give a blank check for anybody to say anything at any time just because the story is true. The laws of lashon hara still apply, and we have to learn these laws. He further writes that even in the cases where you are allowed to say something, you have to say the minimum necessary to achieve the benefit that you're looking for. So let's say the benefit is to stop an abuser or stop a shoplifter, to stop a person from doing a sin. Okay. And it's necessary. The only way to do it, that you've exhausted all the other options. And the only way to get him to stop doing the avera or to stop the damage is to say something negative about him. You have to carefully measure your words to say the minimum necessary to achieve the benefit, meaning you don't have to magnify every crime he did. You don't have to say everything bad he did. You have to say the minimum necessary to get the job done. And that's it. And again, we'll see more on this later. Moving on to rule 7 in the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. He says again, there is no heter to believe lashon hara, even if it's said publicly, and even if the person who is being accused is quiet. I might think, well, in the case of Walder, he did say that he was innocent. In many other cases, people are quiet when they're accused, and the mob takes that as evidence. Oh, if it was false, he would be yelling and screaming and cursing about how terrible it is, and he never did anything like that. The Chafetz Chaim says, no, even if he's quiet when he's accused, you are not allowed to make up your mind and believe the lashon hara is true. Why? Because he might feel, I think very fairly so, that nobody's going to believe him anyway. And it's just going to be adding more fuel to the fire and create more arguments. He says, it's better for me to just stay quiet. And that's it. I'm not going to gain anything by trying to defend myself because they're not going to believe me anyway. So therefore, even if the person is quiet, you're not allowed to believe the lashon hara, which sets up a case basically where people who are accused nowadays in this cancel culture climate, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Because if they don't protest, everybody say, oh, if it was wrong, if it was false, they would have said something. And if they do protest, they'll say, oh, he's lying anyway, and he's just making up stories. So how can a person possibly defend himself in this type of climate? We have to set up a climate and a society where people who are wrongly accused of something have an opportunity to fairly defend themselves and not just be shouted down by some vicious mob looking for blood. He says the same is true, again, in rule number 7. Even if you hear the story from 2 or more people, you're still not allowed to accept it as being true. Again, the most that you're allowed to say is maybe it's true, but you're not allowed to make up your mind. It's definitely, well, everybody's saying it, it must be true. No such thing. Okay. There is no law of testimony except in a Beis Din, and the testimony must be fully verified by the Beis Din. That's the only time that we are allowed to take action based on things that we hear, when it is real edus, real testimony in a Beis Din going through the proper process. This procedure in the case of Walder was clearly not followed. Again, we have no idea of anything that went on in that Beis Din. And once again, we just have to take the word of people who trampled all over Jewish law. It's not how it works. A testimony that can't be challenged is not a valid testimony. Okay. The same is true again. And I have to emphasize this, even if the rumors come out about somebody that is very serious, we're not allowed to believe them unless the matter is clarified, and we're certainly not allowed to tell others about it. And even if the story is printed in the newspaper, we're not allowed to believe it. We're only allowed to suspect that it might be true. Okay. In letter 4 of this section, the Chafetz Chaim writes, we are not allowed to tell others these rumors, this bad information, with the intention of spreading the rumors further, even if it's already widely known. Now, again, if something's published on the internet and everybody's talking about it, so it's widely known, right? So the Chafetz Chaim writes, and he's citing the Rambam here, if our intention in talking about it is simply to spread the rumors further, to find that one person who didn't yet hear about it, or just to fan the flames, we're not allowed to spread it further, even if it's public knowledge. We're only allowed to speak negatively about someone who is known to be a Rasha. Again, somebody who is publicly doing Averos. There are many such people like that today, and they tend to be in the government. They're publicly doing terrible things. You're allowed to speak negatively about them, but not somebody who some rabbi or some group of people say, this person is a Rasha, we know he's a Rasha. That doesn't render somebody a Rasha. Most it does is slanders the person, even if it's true. We're not allowed to speak negatively about somebody just because someone else says that he's a Rasha. You have to know. Public knowledge means that the public sees it firsthand, knows about it firsthand, not secondhand. If your information is secondhand, you're not allowed to believe it's true, and you're not allowed to speak negatively about that person. That's the Jewish law. Okay. Moving on to letter 13 in this section. This is rule 7, letter 13. He writes, again, Beis Din can punish according to the needs of the hour, but it's not some ad hoc self-appointed Beis Din. Okay. And he says again over here, this is only true if there's clear evidence, not if they are only relying on the words of those making the accusations, because anybody can say anything about anybody. Okay. That doesn't constitute actual testimony. Beis Din cannot act based on that alone. You can't just beat people up for no reason because other people are saying terrible things about them. And if a Beis Din does this, they are violating the Torah. Moving on to the next rule, Chafetz Chaim, rule number 8, letter 7. He writes, again, if somebody is known, and he writes something very fascinating here. He writes again, if somebody is known in the city to be a wicked person, then there is a heter to speak badly about him. But then he writes a caveat. He said, the Chafetz Chaim says, I know that people are going to abuse this heter. People are going to take this to some kind of an extreme, and they're going to be saying bad things about people, saying that they're a Rasha, even though they're not a Rasha, and everybody knows about it. He says, I know people are going to use this heter improperly, but I have to write it anyway because this is the Jewish law. People have to know the law. And if people are going to use it improperly, then those people will be punished for it. He says he knows people are going to abuse this heter. And of course, he was certainly right about that, but he wrote it anyway. In rule 8, letter 9, he writes, one is not allowed to shame and curse the dead and spread rumors about them. Right now, Chaim Walder is dead. Whatever he did or didn't do, he's gone. He's being judged, or he's probably already judged in front of the ultimate court. Okay, and that's it. The story's over. If there are victims, again, everybody will be happy to help those victims in any way possible. If anybody knows that somebody is abusing somebody, we'll all step in and try to stop it from happening. But there is nothing further to be gained, and we are not allowed. He says it's an early cherem was placed on shaming and cursing the dead and spreading rumors about them. Once a person is gone, it's over, and you have to leave them alone. He writes in rule number 10, and here's we get to the 7 conditions that all must be met before you can speak badly about somebody. Otherwise, if any of these conditions are not met, you're violating the laws of Lashon Hara, possibly doing dozens of Averos, as we mentioned earlier. Number 1, he says you have to witness it yourself, not hearsay, unless it's clearly ascertained to be true. Now, Shmuel Eliyahu might think he's Eliyahu Hanavi, but he didn't witness any of this firsthand. So for him to say that it's true beyond any shadow of a doubt is violating this first condition right here, because he didn't witness it himself. He himself only heard it from hearsay, and it was not valid testimony. Okay, so he is allowed to trust these people if he so chooses, but he's not allowed to, on the basis of that, spread negative information about Chaim Walder because he didn't witness it himself. That's number 1. And everybody else who's jumping on that bandwagon and saying, well, he said it's true, and I trust him, and the newspaper wrote it, and I trust the newspaper, so it's definitely true, and I'm going to go keep rolling with this story. They're all violating, number 1 right here, they're not allowed to say any of this, period. Number 2, the Chafetz Chaim writes, the second condition, you must be very careful not to jump to conclusions. We've already said this several times. You're not allowed to make up your mind that this person is guilty. At most, you're allowed to suspect. Maybe he's guilty. Now, again, all these people are saying he's definitely guilty. No questions asked. So same thing here. The Beis Din did this. They made up their mind that he was guilty. He never was even invited to appear before the Beis Din until they already rendered a judgment against him. Again, contrary to Jewish law, you can't do that. He has to hear the testimony himself. He has to be present in the court, even if it's very difficult, again, for the people to testify. They have to get over it. However it is, they have to find that strength to do this, if they really want to testify, it has to be done the right way. And he has to be invited to the court. He has to be given a chance to hear the claims being made against him, hear the testimony against him, and speak to defend himself. You're not allowed to jump to conclusions. The court did that. And as a result of that, everybody else is kind of jumping on that bandwagon and jumping to conclusions. So the first two conditions right off the bat were not met. And therefore, it is forbidden to say Lashon Hara. Number 3, you have to first rebuke the person softly before going public. There's no evidence that this was done. Some rabbis have said that they spoke to him privately over the years. I have no idea, and you have no idea. But if you think that somebody's doing the wrong thing, you can't just go blasting on social media. Okay, you have to speak to the person softly, maybe then speak to them a little more harshly. Okay, but you can't just go public with something. Number 4, you can't magnify the crime more than it actually was. Now, to give a contemporary example, let's say somebody commits an extremely horrible crime of saying something offensive or sexist or racist or homophobic or, God help us, transphobic. It's a very terrible crime, a very terrible social crime to do this thing today. He's guilty. He said something offensive. No, see, he said something that you don't like and maybe even hurt someone's feelings. But what happens next? What are people going to say? They say that now, because he said something that's offensive, maybe he'll cause so much pain to somebody that they will commit suicide, or they will encourage other people to also say negative things and offensive things and may cause somebody to commit suicide. So now this person is a murderer, and maybe he's encouraging so many people to say so many offensive things that we should consider him a terrorist. Or maybe he is concerned about taking an injection of something that you believe he should take and he doesn't want to, and he's hesitant about it. Therefore, he's suddenly against all medicine, and he's against all science, and he's crazy, and he's endangering himself and other people, and he's against life, and he's murdering people, and in fact, he's mass murdering people, and he's a terrorist, and he's anti-government, and the FBI should come after him with a SWAT team, all because he's hesitant about taking one particular injection of something. That is a definition of magnifying the crime to more than what it was. If you say something offensive, so your crime is you said something offensive. No, not nice. You have to do tshuva and say you're sorry if in fact what you said is offensive. And again, today, that's also a gray area. But if somebody's hesitant about taking an injection of something, rightly or wrongly, that's all it is. He's not a murderer. He's not anti-life. He's not anti-government. He's not a terrorist. You're not allowed to magnify the crime to more than what it was. Okay, so you get the idea. So now getting back to Walder, they're going out of their way after the fact to make him sound as monstrous as possible. Each one is trying to outdo the previous one in the language that they use about him. They're not even sticking to the actual crimes that he is accused of, but they're trying to defame everything else about him. They're talking about what kind of a student he was and what he was like when he was younger and his personality. They're trying to make people loathe him, because the more you loathe him, the more you'll trust them and the more you'll accept the accusations. Oh, such a horrible person must have certainly done these things. Okay, so again, even if the story is true, and even if it is allowed to be shared, one can only share what needs to be shared, and whatever is shared must be entirely factual. You can't magnify it or exaggerate the crime a single bit. You can't do anything to that. So again, this has also been violated. We've gone through 4 of the 7 conditions so far. They've all been trampled on. Number 5, says the Chafetz Chaim, if you say the Lashon Hara, you must intend it only for a positive purpose, not for any personal pleasure, ulterior motive, you're bearing a grudge, anything like that. It must be strictly 100% purely for a positive purpose. If you have 1% of an ulterior motive or some savage pleasure in it, you're not allowed to say it. It has to be 100% purely for a positive purpose. So people claim they're saying it to help the victims. Let me tell you something, they're not helping any victims at all. No victims are being helped by this. And if what they're saying is true, that they really do intend to help the victims, the time to help the victims was a long time ago. They dafka failed the victims. Okay, and if they say, well, they're helping future victims, they're not helping future victims either, because people who are mentally ill are very sick people, and they are child abusers. They're not going to be deterred by the fact that somebody might say bad things about them on Facebook after the fact, or some court is going to say bad things about them. They're not going to be deterred by that. The slander is not turning off all of these abusers. So the only people, all they are helping is people who want to make accusations against somebody and then ruin his life. Those are the only people that they're actually helping. They're not helping any victims, past, present, or future. So what positive purpose really is there in all of the Lashon Hara that people are spreading? All they're doing, again, is making it easier for people to assassinate other people's character, knowing that an angry mob will stand behind them without asking questions. Judaism doesn't have a cancel culture or a Me Too movement. There's no such thing in Judaism. That's something that we've kind of borrowed from the Goyim, and it's time to give it back. It's not for us. Okay. Others certainly have an ulterior motive as well, as the original article appeared in Haaretz, which is a terrible, terrible newspaper, left-wing rag, anti-Torah, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-everything that's good in the world. Okay, these people certainly had an ulterior motive, and so do the self-righteous, so-called modern Orthodox people using the story as leverage to defame and slander all those other Jews, those black hat Jews that they fear and hate so much. Oh, we found somebody, he's bad, they're all bad. They're so self-righteous in what they're doing, but they're really just piggybacking on the story because they can't stand certain types of Jews, and they're using this as leverage to smear all of them. They're bloggers. I'm not going to name them, but you probably know who they are, who are literally obsessed with this, and they jump on every opportunity to go after the black hat Jews. I don't wear a black hat. I don't wear a white hat. I don't wear any hat, but they're Jews. They're my brothers and sisters, and you're just not allowed to say things about people like that. You're not allowed to smear an entire segment of the Jewish people because one of them may have been a bad guy. Doesn't work like that. So people who have an ulterior motive are violating number 5. Now we get to the 6th condition that must be met before it is permissible to say any slander. If you can achieve the positive purpose a different way, you must first do so. You're only allowed to say the slander if there's no other way of, let's say, stopping the criminal. Okay, here they have no positive purpose. There's nothing that they're going to achieve. Again, they're not helping any victims. They're not putting anybody behind bars. They're not accomplishing anything. They're not even making any, they certainly made no attempt to achieve it in a different way before engaging in the slander. And finally, the 7th condition that must be met, he writes, this is a very tricky one, but it's really, really important. Let's say, again, you see a shoplifter. To give a simple example, you see him stealing $50 worth of stuff from a store. So according to Jewish law, what's he obligated? He's obligated to first pay back what he stole, the $50, and in some cases, maybe he has to pay double. So maximum, let's say $100, that person is now guilty for paying, okay? If by saying the slander about him, you will cause greater damage to the criminal than what is coming to him by actual Jewish law, you're not allowed to say the slander. So let's say you now publish an article that millions of people read that this guy shoplifted $50. So is his damage from that article going to be $50? No, it's going to be incalculable. He might lose his job. He might never be able to get a job again. His family might throw him out. He might, if he's single, he might never be able to get married. He might be thrown out of the community. His life might be totally ruined. He might go bankrupt. He might literally lose everything because you slandered him. So technically speaking, he is a criminal, right? And you may be allowed in some cases to notify other people that he's a criminal. But if the damage that you're going to cause him by slandering him is greater than what he's actually liable for, you're not allowed to say it. Okay. So here, getting back to the case of Walder, were they allowed to ban his books simply out of spite? Absolutely not. Let's say he's guilty of all these things. Let's say he abused 22 people or 22,000 people. Really bad guy. He might be guilty of the death penalty according to Jewish law. So fine, if we had a Sanhedrin that was able to give the death penalty, then fine. Otherwise, we punish him a different way. But you're not allowed to ban his books and take away his livelihood and the livelihood of his family. That has nothing to do with his crime. You're not allowed to do that. That is beyond what's actually coming to him. You're not allowed to condemn his widow and his children to poverty for the rest of their lives. Are these righteous people who are going after him, are they raising funds to help these victims who are innocent and didn't do anything wrong? No, they don't have a shred of compassion whatsoever. Okay, so in general, what happens with the cancel culture is they don't care at all about actual Jewish law. Once they have someone in their targets, anything goes. Once they identify somebody as being a bad person or a criminal, again, rightly or wrongly, even if it's true, they say anything goes. Pile it on. Now, Judaism doesn't allow a court to give even one extra lash to a criminal. It's a maximum of 39 lashes in the Torah. Okay, so let's say they count wrong and somebody is slated to get 15 lashes because it's done in sets of 3. Okay. And the guy counts wrong. He gives him 16. He gives him an extra lash. So the executioner, so to speak, the one who's giving the lashes is now himself a criminal and he gets lashes. And if the person dies from that extra lash, you hit him a little bit too hard and he dies, then the one who hit him with the consent of the court is guilty of murder. And he's tried as an actual murderer. Again, we're talking about a criminal himself who is being whipped in Beis Din. And if somebody hits him even slightly harder than he should be hit, that person can be guilty of murder. Okay, so even criminals, even very bad people who do very bad things, they still have rights according to the Torah, and justice must be meted out carefully and with a perfect measure. There's no such concept as he's a bad guy, therefore anything goes. even criminals are protected to a certain extent by Jewish law, and that has to be respected by everybody, because if you don't respect the rights of criminals, then you don't respect the rights of the innocent either. That's the truth. So in conclusion, the Beis Din violated the laws of Lashon Hara, among other things. The media trampled all over the laws, and all of those who accept the story as true, without question, are wrong and guilty of these crimes of Lashon Hara, and all those who spread it are wrong. Okay? Well, I want to conclude with the Shmiras HaLashon chapter 2. He says, in heaven, in Shemaim, and we're all going to go there at some point, they judge you in the same way that you judged others. So if you generally try to see the good in other people, when you see somebody doing something that's a gray area, it could be right, it could be wrong, the facts aren't so clear, but you judge him favorably. You say he probably was doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing, or even if he was doing the wrong thing, he probably didn't know, or maybe it was just an accident, or maybe he did tshuva, or maybe he didn't realize. You're trying to find the good in other people. So when you yourself are judged, Hashem is going to judge you the same way, because we all do wrong things all the time. But are we doing wrong things because we're horrible, nasty, monstrous people? I hope not. I don't think so. I think most of the time we just slip up. You know, life is hard. We have challenges. We slip sometimes. The wrong word comes out. We do the wrong thing. Maybe we had positive intentions. Maybe we didn't know, right? So if we're judging other people favorably, then Hashem will judge us favorably. If we're looking to prosecute other people and jump on them and smear them anytime we have a little opening to do so, that's going to come back on us as well. That brings prosecution upon the person who does it, and also upon the entire Jewish people. That's the last thing that we need at these times. Again, it's the last thing that we need in any time, but especially now, where we feel that we're in very dangerous times, where we know that we're in danger, and we know that we're on the cusp of either being redeemed, hopefully, or God forbid, something else happening. And we all want to be on the right side. We all want Hashem to judge us with merits, to find merits for us. We have to judge other people in a positive way as well, even if they were criminals, and even if they did something wrong. We can't just throw the whole book at them. We have to be careful and measured. Okay, so that's the end of the Chafetz Chaim today. Again, this is only a very small synopsis of the Chafetz Chaim. Everybody needs to learn this. Even if we know it, we need to look at it again and again and again, and make sure that this is in our minds before we say anything or post anything or trust anything. It's really, really important that we have our fingertips on these laws, because if we don't, we're likely to get in very big trouble. Now, again, unlike the rabbis who don't really care about Jewish law, I am accessible, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them. Don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, if we have no questions, and I will throw it back to Lowell for some closing remarks.
Well, I think it's best if you give the closing remarks for the talk that you gave. My only comment would be to pick up on one point that you made, that whatever the Aveira is, it could be money laundering, it could be prostitution, it could be selling body part, doesn't matter. If you're going to focus on one person, you can't be selective and say, okay, just that one, and then all of a sudden I don't want to hear about anybody else. That already is a tip-off that something is very wrong. So if people are going to be concerned about child abuse, then it has to be across the board. Not just, oh, that one person, but don't just look over here. Don't look over there. This is a critical point that you made. Whatever the issue, whatever the crime is on our menu of crimes, horrors, and awful things that people can do to other people, it has to be across the board, everybody. That means, for example, my team, I'm blind to my team. Forgive me for using a quotation from English medieval literature. I had to talk about this I had a weekly show in college called Music of the Worlds and Other Tidbits. And of course, if you're in a college, the students and professors have no lack of anything to talk about. There's an English proverb which says, each man thinketh the smell of his own fart sweet. And it means that I'm quite happy looking at problems. I'm in France, let's look at what the Germans are doing. I'm in Germany, let's look at what the French are doing, or the reverse. I only want to look at, I'm looking at everything's green in the other pasture. it has to be across the board. Not that, for example, people who write in North Tel Aviv, at Tel Aviv University, isn't that terrible what those settlers are doing in Judea and Samaria, but don't want to bring up the Tel Aviv University is built on the ruins of an Arab village. If you believe that, move the university. So this kind of selective rage is a real problem. That would be my only comment. Whatever the subject is, and as Rabbi Weissman clearly pointed out, it's imperative that rabbis, judges, follow their own laws. It's inconceivable that the laws that Rabbi Weissman cited are not known by the people who are having their witch hunts. For example, a book we had to read in high school called the Oxbow Incident. It's all about a lynching. And as you read through the story, it appears the guys are guilty. There's a kangaroo court, it's in the old Wild West found. Everything seems just right, and these guys are hung. The next page, a bit of evidence comes in, which they didn't have, and turns out they were innocent. So there's a reason we have laws and procedures and systems and structures, and it's absolutely critical that people who represent them follow them. And this is a big problem in Israeli society, where in March 2020, when the phony, we're coming out of this now, I believe, the phony lockdowns began. Does everyone remember that 2 years ago, you couldn't leave your home on Passover? Overnight, you literally couldn't leave. Our daughter and son-in-law live down the street, you can't go to them. Who broke those rules?
People in charge.
The president.
Yeah, the president,
and the prime minister.
Yeah.
Now, in what were they saying? Rules are for the ruled, not for the rulers. And in your face, at least, you know, as Machiavelli said, it's not important that the prince be noble and righteous, but he must appear to be so. Or as someone who converted to Judaism from an upper class WASP Canadian family told me, her mother said to her, "It's not your morals that matter, my dear, it's your manners." This is the B'nai Yefet. Everything has to look good. Greek on the surface, but that's why the beauty of Yefet has to dwell in the tents of Shem. It's not enough. Yeah, your morals do matter. Not, of course you should have good manners, but that's not enough. So we had a president who had people over and said, well, my wife died. Well, lots of people's wives died. We had a prime minister who had a family member over. And then a president who looked at the people here in our little gulag, our Warsaw ghetto. People may not want to hear it. This little Warsaw ghetto on the Mediterranean said, Ein lanu eretz acheret. What does that mean? That means you don't like it? Where are you going to go? You're in Siberia in a camp? I'm in charge of the camp. I'm the commissar. Scream, no one will hear. Ein lanu eretz acheret. They count on that, the ruling powers here, that people will say, Ein lanu, ein lanu. You're stuck. What are you going to do about it? And maybe one day when you're a big shot like me, you can break the rules too and give everybody the finger. Whereas in a properly run society, the king goes first into battle, into everything. He said he's more responsible to follow the laws than everybody else. That's in a properly run, in any society. In most countries in the world, even where it's your manners that matter, not your morals, if someone was caught doing that, they're supposed to pretend they did something wrong and they have to resign. Resign in Israel? I'm a friar. No. I'll conclude with one remark, and this very much relates to what Rabbi Weissman said. Jackie Mason, who was an ordained rabbi and a real rabbi, not from the so-called denominational Judaism, whatever that is. I don't understand what that is. He was a great comedian, so he went to be a comedian. So in one of his gag routines, he said, why did God create Gentiles? Answer, someone has to buy retail. What is he saying? Rules are for Goyim. We're the smart crowd. We don't need rules. We're too smart for that. That's for Goyim or people from English-speaking countries who are regularly made fun of. You follow rules schmules. No, you have to, rules, it's absolutely critical that the people who represent the society in all areas follow the rules. It's inconceivable that you can have a professor of ethics at the Hebrew University who was exposed that he was beating up his wife. And I mean beating up as in you go to the hospital beating up. So students protested, but once again, each profession is an organized conspiracy against the lady. Who said that? George Bernard Shaw. The professor circled the wagons around that professor and protected him. A group can never have the foxes investigating the foxes guarding the chicken coop by definition. So this is a real problem. My own thought would be that as the truth begins to emerge more and more about the planned mass murder worldwide, that and the scale of the criminality is so big, it's not so easy to hide it. Even the Nazis pulling out from Eastern Europe as the Soviets were advancing, they were not able to cover up their crimes. They tried to make the camps disappear. It didn't work. The scale of the criminality is so vast now that this is not possible, including here in Israel. As people start to drop dead and go crazy and get crippled, it's going to break down. The silver lining in the cloud here is that Israel's Erev Rav establishment, and I mean all sectors, academic, economic, political, rabbinical, everything, medical, scientific, is going to be cleaned out, because people who have been involved in these things will lose their licenses to practice as lawyers, judges, doctors, academic professional license, smicha, and that's just for openers. And this will allow an opportunity for a real house cleaning here in the land of Israel. Those would be my long comments on what Rabbi Weissman said. And to conclude, lawgivers are more responsible to follow the laws than those they give the laws to, not less. That's the basic point. And therefore, it's inconceivable that a rabbi on that level would not follow the laws that Rabbi Weissman is referring to. It's also inconceivable he wouldn't know what they are. Those would be my only comments. Now let's see in the chat, Rav Hanania, there's a lot of stuff here. It looks like you do have some questions or comments.
Yeah, well, there's one here. What do you say to the rabbis who say they are trying to save us from the books, which must be treif now? Let them prove their case. These books have been on the market for many, many, many years. Did they just wake up out of a coma today and open up these books? Come on. If there's something treif in the books, it should have been exposed a long time ago. This has nothing to do with the books. If they have a case, let them bring it. Let them open up the Chafetz Chaim and the other books that we have and argue their case to the public. They can't just make a proclamation, these books are treif, let's burn all the books. We don't follow orders, we follow the Torah. The rabbis have to follow the Torah too. They have to present to us a clear Torah case for what they want us to do. And if they don't do that, and if the case doesn't really hold water, we ignore them and we stop trusting them. So I don't see anything treif. I haven't read his books, but you know, I see no reason to believe that they are just because there's a witch hunt against them. Somebody also asked, Shlomo Karlbach, who was slurred after his death, was that completely Lashon Hara? Absolutely. There's no heter for it. As I mentioned earlier in the Chafetz Chaim, he says there's an early cherem on slandering the dead. Once somebody's dead, the books are closed on him. He's getting judged up there. He doesn't have to be judged down here anymore. So again, on that note, everybody, how does one who is a victim of Lashon Hara defend themselves? Well, unfortunately, in our society today, you can't. There's no opening for it anymore. There shouldn't be Lashon Hara. Okay, if the person is a victim of Lashon Hara, I guess they find out who their real friends are very, very quickly. That's really what it boils down to. Anybody can say anything about anybody. Again, I've said this before. I was a classroom teacher for years. I never abused a kid. I never touched a kid, and I was never even alone with a kid. But let's say the government of Israel decided that I was being too pesky and they wanted to assassinate my character. That was the best way of getting rid of me. What if they tracked down a couple of former students and offered them $500,000 to make up a story about me? Now, who wouldn't believe it, right? Who would dare stand by me if they did that today, right? Now, they're able to do that to anybody because we don't observe the laws of slander. We have to observe what the Torah says, because again, if we're going to go after anybody and believe what all the slander that people say about others, it can boomerang against us as well. There is measure for measure justice in this world. And that's why we have to be especially careful about the laws of slander. You can't slander other people. You can't accept slander about other people, just as you wouldn't want other people to do that if you were the victim of slander. Okay, on that note, I will wish everybody a good night. The recording will be on Rumble within 24 hours, and look forward to seeing you next week.